Hi, Rhett. You got the virtual camera on?
It's happening. I've got the...
Right? Oh, no.
Pardon?
What are we not getting?
It shows it's on.
But you're not getting the camera or anything on Zoom.
Oh. Sorry. Let's look again. Me, buddy. You scared me when I thought you were going to come up here.
You want me to come up?
No.
Okay. Don't make me come up
I'm
there.
trying to tell you I'm afraid of you.
Oh. It's like my kids. Well, good evening, everyone. Time for to start our Bible study. We're studying the life of David. If you want to go ahead and open up to 2 Samuel, we'll get started there. Please, we got our chat going, and keep an eye. Jack's helping me out, so we'll be able to look. You are able to provide some good input. We've had some great discussions on this section of the life of David as we've gone through the first chapter, the first book of Samuel, and looking at that phase of his life where he comes out from being the shepherd boy in Saul, then finally Saul is killed in battle, and this now starts this transition, which I call, a civil war. And this civil war is dividing the kingdom, and it's kind of interesting that later on when it divides again in this almost same alignment of tribes when it comes to the northern tribes and the southern tribes. What's interesting, though, is when Solomon, after he dies, Rehoboam and Jeroboam divide the kingdom, Benjamin stays with Judah and all the Rehoboam. So good to see everybody kind of getting all lined up, getting set for the class. Well, it looked like we're supposed to be getting some rain, so I'm kind of excited about that. Hope we keep the power on. I know one night I was down here and we had a pretty good lightning storm and we lost all power and everything went down. But that's all right. I'd take the rain over a little bit of darkness now and then. So, at the end or the very beginning of chapter of 2 Samuel, we find we're anointed after the death of Saul. When he comes, the men from Judah come and they anoint him as king, but he's only the king of Judah. And so then we're at the point in our story where Abner has already made Ishbosheth the king for the northern tribes. Now he made him king, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that because I want us to look at Abner and Joab tonight as well, because there's some very interesting traits that we see in these individuals and the influence in their family relations. And remember, this is a civil war, so that means that it's a war between family, just like the North and the South that we had in America in 1864, 62, whenever. And the deaths that you see are family, all of them, and the scars run deep. So tonight we're going to see this. And so when we take a look at the map here, we see where Mahanaim is where Ishbosheth and Abner are at. And they're up in this northern area here. Quite a ways in a good, nice, safe area, because remember, the Philistines have still come over and they're occupied. It's not a secure territory in the north here at all. In Hebron, we find where this is where 7 here. Something else that I read from a commentary talking about the fact that the Philistines had come in and invaded when it's the weakest. Even Judah, remember, the tribe of Judah also supplied soldiers to go in and fight. But yet when David becomes king, invasion or mention of the Philistines coming in and bothering or pestering the tribe of Judah, and if we would have it marked over here, we would see where the Philistines actually dwelling and working out of, and Ziklag is where one of the cities it was given, which I think this map's not really correct. But the king, remember, the relationship that David had with the Philistine king was a good one. He trusted him. He felt comfortable with taking him to battle. It was the other kings, the other city kings, that said, no, we don't want him with us. So I think after the fall, remember, there's 7 years that go on here. So there's enough time that if they wanted to, they could have come down and started to invade into Judah, but they don't. And I think it's because of the respect of David and the relationship that he has, and possibly thinking he could win over this area because of having a subjugate type of person ruling in his place, and maybe he could influence it. Well, let's just kind of review. We're still some things about Ishbosheth, that he was 40 years old when he was installed or made king by Abner. And therefore Abner takes him and brings him in to be king. So there's a lot of turmoil in the northern tribes. He's ruling over 11 of the 12 tribes. He only rules for 2 years. David is 30 years old, so that means he's 35 whenever Ishbosheth is installed by Abner in the north, 7.5 years down in the south. And then he will move the capital, actually, up to Jerusalem, as we know. So he's about 37 years old whenever he comes into, when Ishbosheth is murdered and the reuniting finally starts to happen. So if you think, go back to all the way to this, it didn't happen very fast, did it? I mean, this was a very slow process, it seems. And if you were David, I mean, you're looking at 17 plus years of coming to finally have that fulfillment that God had promised him, that he would rule over Israel. So now let's look at what we talked a lot about. We're not going to go back into a lot of detail, but I think that historically, this is something that we need to think about, is this historical battle. Now, if they've been in battle for 5 years, that means there's been a lot of conflict going on, and we have no record of all the conflict that occurs between the 11 northern tribes and Judah. But we know that it's recorded, and we've read it, where it says that there was a long civil war. So wars include fighting battles, but we only have this one, and we have one that we'll look at later where it appears that Joab is coming back from somewhere. We're not even sure where he comes back as far as battle. But this battle, I think, is important historically because of it's the pinnacle. It's a point where it changes and the dynamics shift. And we read where it says that the house of David, as time goes on, continues to grow stronger, and the house of Saul is growing weaker. Abner knows this, and I want us to keep that in mind. Abner is aware that they're losing more and more influence, and that David is very aware of the prophecies. He's aware. He was standing there when King Saul admitted himself that when Saul said, "I thing." So Abner knows this, and so we're going to talk a little more about his personality and what's going on with why would he hold back. And just bringing immediately, trying to unite them all. They have a common enemy. And that seems to be, or it should be, the greater in the 11 tribes north and the one in the south. Everybody against the Philistines. But the civil war is distracting and keeping it tore up. And Abner will not try to reach across and unite. I believe David would. I think David is sitting in Hebron. And I think as we look at some of the historical documentation as we read through the scripture, I think you can gather the fact that David is a little more methodical about how to handle. We know as well that from the time that Saul was killed, that he started consulting the Lord. He consulted the Lord as to where he should go into Judah and rule from. So we know that he's consulting the Lord. So his actions are very spiritually minded. And he's looking at the bigger picture of what God is trying to get him to accomplish. But in this battle, one of the things that I think is interesting, and Becky and I were talking about it, is how did they know to meet there? And that's what I'm using this to explain why this. I believe that very similar to the way that when the Philistines lined up, when David and Goliath, in that story, what we find there is the champion, Goliath, would go down to the valley and challenge any of their champions of the Israels, the Hebrews, and whoever won, winner take all. And so I think this was a planned meeting, and one of the things we can see about that is that when they arrive at the pool of Gideon, that they just all line up and sit around. Abner's men are sitting on one side, Joab's men are sitting on the other side. And it's Abner who finally says to Joab, hey, let's take our best. Let's make kind of our championship teams, and let's let the champions go to battle. And that is usually a setup for whoever wins is winner takes all, and the rest submit. But apparently, as this melee's breaks out, that it sounds like that all the champions kill themselves, they kill each other, and it just goes crazy. And a full raging battle breaks out between the two armies, which then Abner is forced to retreat. And in that retreat is what's important. And I think that's why we have this, because this point right here where Abner kills Ashel is something that's going to impact the reunification of all the tribes. When it says Abner struck him in the stomach with the butt of a spear so that the spear came out his back, and he fell there and he died where he was. You know, I looked at one of those type of swords, supposedly they believe are spears, and I'll tell you what, to be able to take something that big and with a backward thrust of it and pierce all the way through a man, it would take a lot of strength. It would be very strong. Becky, is the video okay? Just looks kind of jerky on the Zoom. I don't know if we're okay. I know Jack had said that the YouTube video and audio were choppy. Is it in the green? Okay. Maybe it's just, all right, well, we're getting it out of the building without it, so maybe it's YouTube. So for Abner, he had already warned Ashel not to come after him. He didn't want to kill him. He even tells him, how am I going to look at your brother if I kill you, Joab? And Abner knows the ramifications if he kills him, but he does. And so Joab continues the pursuit, and finally Abner reaches a place where all of the Benjamites come in and reinforce him and back him up. And then Abner calls out to Joab and to everybody saying, are you going to keep going? Are we all going to die by the sword? This is brother against brother. What are you doing? And Joab only relents because the words that he said to his men caused it to cool down. Joab wanted to continue the pursuit. He wanted to kill Abner. And it moved from where Ashel was going after Abner more for the prestige of killing Abner, you know, the main general behind the Israel army, wanted to take trophies. And that's where he is saying, and when you read the scripture, it looks a little confusing when Abner tells him, look to your left, look to your right, get those guys' stuff, you know, take theirs, you know, quit. I don't want to have to kill you. And he won't. Now with Joab's, though, Joab's is personal. Now you've killed my brother. And so that is something that is going to continue, this vengeance. The vengeance is something that's come along. The aftermath of this engagement tells us a lot. When we look at it in 2 Samuel chapter 2, verse 30 and 31, we see where the numbers of the casualty list. David, he lost 19 men, plus Ashel, so 20. But Abner lost 360. So you're looking at 20 to 360. Some have looked at these numbers, and I read some commentaries talking about the idea that this kind of shows the weakness of the tribe of Benjamin and the warriors that were available for Abner to use, and the skills. If you remember that David's army was pulled back away so he could not be involved in the engagement with the Philistines and Saul, when Saul and his sons were killed, and the army was decimated. The Israeli army was decimated and had to retreat. David's army comes south back to Ziklag, and he's sitting down there secure. So his army is pretty intact, and they're strong warriors. So I think that this is kind of something we can look at and see where the weakness, that idea of the war and the impact that it has. In chapter 3:11, there was a long war between the house of Saul and the house of David, and David grew stronger and stronger, while the house of Saul became weaker and weaker. And I think that's one of the things we see in the scripture supporting the casualty list and comparing it. All right, now I'm going to do something that I never really do because it drives me nuts, and it's always a little crazy, but I think it's important for us to take a little dive off to the side here and look at some genealogy. One, I've always been terrible at pronouncing names. So to me, when I look at genealogies, I'm always wanting to jump past it just because I'm intimidated by ever trying to pronounce half the names that you see, and I'll grab the important ones you'll see. But I think it's important to help give us that rounded picture, because we see the impact of these relationships on each other. So let's start and let's look at the house of David. Now, this is the big picture, and we're going to reference this. I'm going to come back to this as we go through 2 Samuel here, because we'll see the relationship and how this is developing. And even this one, even though it seems to be the most credible, there's a few in here that some would dispute on exactly what their relationship was. But overall, it seems to be in alignment with Chronicles and other historians that look at this. But just to let you know, there are still some things sometimes with these genealogies that I think can be a little confusing. So I'm going to try to keep it as simple as the only way I can do it too. So let's dive down into David himself when we look at David. Now, if you'll look across the top here with David, what you find is, first, we know Jesse was his dad. Nahash was his mother. And then these are his brothers. And over here, Abigail, a sister. Now, we've heard this name a lot in reference to Bashiah, Joab, and Ashbel. These three brothers are the key mighty men and mighty warriors of David. And so we hear the sons of Zeruiah a lot. We hear this name a lot. So this is Zeruiah. So that means he's a brother. And so that means then these are all nephews. So, when we look at the death of Abishai, it's not something that was uneventful to David, because we know that whenever they come back, they bring his body. They have a period of mourning as well for Abishai, and then they bury him. So, but I wanted to bring it up because when we look at Joab and the relationship, it's by blood, but it's tenuous when we look at some of that. Now, without having to go through and read, we're gonna, if you want to, what I recommend is to open up your Bible and go to 2 Samuel. And in 2 Samuel, I'm going to go through. I'm not going to hit everything. I'm going to hit the majority of the scripture as we go through and discuss the historical events that are occurring. But one of the passages we see listed right up where in Hebron, that he had these children and the wives that he has. So now outside of Michael, we see that Michael is the wife that he was Saul's daughter, and he had to leave. So he's been away from her. Well, if we're talking about the 7 years during the Civil War plus the years of Rome, it's been over 10, maybe 10-something years that he is not, as far as, unless there's something not recorded where they had ever met. But we know that she was given to another man. So she has been given off and married. A whole bunch coming. There's once he gets up into Israel. But Adonijah is the one that we will find out when it comes to Solomon.
Ron,
Yeah.
I think YouTube went down. I don't see you on YouTube, and I don't hear you.
Abner, if you notice there, we see that Abner is Saul's general, but he's his uncle. And so after Saul and the sons are killed, then after 5 years, then Ishbosheth is placed into power. And that only, again, we'll bring these up. There's some other ones here that we'll see. as we go through the story here. So now let's look at verses 6 and 7. While there was war between the house of Saul, Abner was making himself strong in the house of Saul. Now Saul had a concubine whose name was Rizpah, the daughter of Aiah. And Ishbosheth said to concubine. So who is Rizpah? Rizpah is the concubine of, it's interesting because it's his stepmother, and I have no idea how they looked at, their concubines, but they definitely had brothers and siblings that would come from those concubines. So, but there's more than that, because even Ishbosheth sees what's going on. When that's why I was talking about Adonijah. Adonijah, when David is on his deathbed, Adonijah goes ahead and tries to seize power. One of the things he does is he asks Bathsheba, his mother, for the hand in marriage of one of the concubines. And because of his birth order, and because of being the oldest at that time, that was a power play that Adonijah was trying to do, and that was something customary. Somehow, if you were able to be with one of the concubines of the king and then turn around, you have this kind of opportunity to usurp power. So that's why it's honestly a legitimate concern, because Ishbosheth, I'm sure, is already feeling the power of Abner and the influence and the overwhelming influence that Abner is probably exerting on him. Abner is not a dummy, and I'm not saying that Abner is necessarily cruel, but we also know that Ishbosheth, one of his meanings to his name is worthless. He seems to be a lot more passive than what Abner is. So Abner's going to dominate. Abner's looking at trying to, have power and bring the northern tribes together. And in spite of all of that, it's sliding away. The power is sliding away from them. So that's why that Ishbosheth is very upset about this idea of his commander, who has the military power, has the respect, sleeping with one of his father's concubines. So let's look at the response, though, of Abner. Then Abner was very angry over the words of Ishbosheth and said, "Am I a dog's head of Judah? To this day I keep showing steadfast your father to his brothers, your father to his brothers, and to his friends, and have not given you into the hand of David. And yet you charge me today." So what's so bad about it? And most of the historians and scholars look at this, and they do see that this is kind of a power play. You can't help but look at what Abner has done all along here from the death of Saul, is try to reestablish power, and that power seems to be by using one of the weaker sons as a puppet. And now, when he starts to move in and have one of the king's concubines, what he's doing is winning more and more influence in the tribes and respect, and gaining that type of popularity to where he would easily be able to go ahead and take over as a king. But he has a good point, he has some good points about what he's saying. But I thought I want to look at when he says, "Am I a dog's head of Judah?" If you'll recall, well, first off, dogs were not dogs like today. Today, dogs in America, anyway, not in all countries, but in America, when we say a dog, it's not really offensive. We like, but in Palestine, no, they didn't really have pet dogs. Dog was more of a scavenger, more of like a raccoon. It was just, dogs were not something that people really respected or wanted around. And if you'll recall, Goliath, one of the statements he made when he was challenging the Hebrews was by calling them, when David comes down into battle, he looks at him and he says, "Am I a dog that you bring this little guy out here?" So it was a tremendous insult And that's what he's trying to say. Now, he also says, am I a dog's head of Judah? So, and that's why this ties with then his description of the things that he has done to protect the house of Saul and the 10 northern tribes. Because I may be a lowlife, but partiality to Judah, because look at what I have done for all of the house. And it is his family. I mean, everything he's done, Abner, I mean, he's the uncle. So why would he not have a right, to have some power? But boy, this just seems to really flip Abner. And I mean, it seems like he's taking the new to calm him down. So I wonder, about the conflict in the relationship that, we don't have all the details. We don't need all the details because this isn't the focus of this story. The focus of the story is the fulfillment of God's promise to David in becoming king over all the tribes. But we can look and kind of really have a good confidence in the idea that there's been this relationship between the two, Abner and Ishbosheth, and I think that Abner is done with him. Maybe, because if he was really trying to usurp by taking a concubine, I think he would have just ignored him. Let the little puppet king talk all he wants. Who cares? Blah, 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 blah. I don't care what you have to say. You're in king by name only. I'm the one that put you there. So, this was the straw that broke the camel's back. But I think that, when we look at this, that Abner is seeing the writing on the wall. He is also seeing the idea that they're not succeeding. And then to look at what Ishbosheth, the way that he's treating him, he flips. And we see Abner's decision to join with David, and he says it it's at least it's recorded as if it happened in the same conversation. We don't know for sure, but it's recorded. But the point's the same, is his conversation. And so this is Abner talking and saying this, and this is kind of a way of not cursing God, but swearing. When he says, God do so to Abner, and more so also, if I do not accomplish for David what the Lord has sworn to him, to transfer the kingdom from the house of Saul and set up the throne of David from Dan to Bathsheba. And Ishbosheth could not answer Abner another word because he feared him. It was over. That Ishbosheth could not respond. And now this is where we really see how much power that Abner has over Ishbosheth, because he just takes total control, and there's nothing that Ishbosheth can do. That's what really verse 11 there is telling us, is that he was afraid. He was afraid of Abner. And I think he had good reason to be afraid of Abner. So Abner sends a message to David. It's time. It's time to reunite. So verse 12, and Abner sent messengers to David on his behalf. Whose behalf? On Abner's behalf. On his behalf, saying, to whom does the land belong? Rhetorical question. Make your covenant with me, and behold, my hand shall be with you to bring. Now, I thought that's kind of interesting. You're losing, and you've heard this term, unconditional surrender. Why does David need to take any conditions? Abner, give it up. Just make a proclamation that we're gone. And everybody needs to get behind. Because Abner wants power. Abner really wants to stay in play, stay in action, not stay around and play. He wants to stay in power and stay in the action and influence. So his best way to do is, honestly, kind of cut the whole Civil War thing out. Let's stop the fighting, negotiate, and try to come across, because, he could also get killed in battle. We don't know what the outcome could be. But David's in the position of power. David has no reason at all to accept anything except just send one back and tell him, no. Well, I'm not making it. Why would you make a covenant, Abner? What do you have to, okay, a covenant's between two individuals who make an agreement. Okay, Abner, what are you bringing to the table? Oh, you're going to bring the tribes. I'm taking them. The military power, he's got the soldiers. Hey, Abner, remember the last time we had an engagement? I waxed you pretty hard. So I'll just wait you out. You collapse because you guys aren't handling those Philistines up there real well either. And I'm sitting down here fairly secure. So, I mean, it's overstating it, but there is a part where I think that people in the world would consider that type of a thought, but that's not David. Again, David is strong unification, not through dominance and fear, but he's bringing them together not just in a structural organizational way, but a way that's going to be spiritual as well. So David accepts. He says, okay, we'll do it. But there's conditions. Very interesting. I mean, right now he already has 6 wives in the wilderness. He's already got 6 kids. But man, David has not forgot that first wife that he has. And so in verse 13, and he said, good, I will make a covenant with you. But one thing I require of you, that is, you shall not see my face unless you first bring to see my face. So, when we look at that, you think, well, we saw that, remember that genealogy and the family tree? Michal, it's been many years since he's seen her. Since David has seen Michal, but this is something that he wants to resolve. And I think that he does love her. And one of the things that he brings out, and David sends messengers, and this is when David then sends a message back in verse 14, and this is where, if you've got your Bible open, because I'm not going to put the verse up, so we can kind of move on, but we're still got a good little discussion, some topics I want to keep on task with. But then David sent messengers to Ishbosheth, Saul's son, saying, give me my wife Michal, for whom I paid the bridal price of 100 foreskins for the Philistines. And Ishbosheth sent, and he took her from her husband, Pateli, the son of Laish. But her husband went with her, weeping all the way after her, all the way to Barim. Then Abner said to him, go, return. And he returned. So it receives a letter from Abner on Abner's behalf. David says it's yes, condition. And then the letter responding back goes to Ishbosheth. And I thought, well, does it matter which one it goes to? I think it does. I think there's something that's being expressed here. The messengers come, and David is no fool. David is a warrior. David is keenly aware of the situation that's going on. He knows that Abner is dominating and that Ishbosheth is just the puppet. So why did he write the letter not to Abner, but he wrote it to Ishbosheth? And I believe it has 2 things. One, minimizes and puts Abner back a ways by not giving him the respect of directly responding to Abner and saying, okay, Abner, but these are my conditions. And the second one is by showing and sending it to Ishbosheth, it's showing some kindness to the house of Saul. This is something that, remember, Jonathan and he was a covenant between the two to not forget the house of Saul and his house and to show kindness. It's showing respect. David isn't anticipating to execute him. That would really not be politically smart. Because if he was to go ahead and just have him, once he surrenders, execute him, disrespect him, it's not going to help to unify the tribes. Remember, he's a Benjamite. So, no, I don't want to do that. So if I direct my response to Ishbosheth, I'm showing him some kindness. I'm showing him respect, even though I know he's got no power. And so he responds to Ishbosheth. And Ishbosheth, boop, yep, no problem, rips away Michal, which really then, if he had already been married to David, that was more legitimate. But it shows the love that the husband had and the ruthlessness that, Abner turned around and go home. And he goes. Remember the last time they tried to trail Abner? Yeah, he got a sword stuck on Ishbosheth when he got, murdered. And I think the man was wise. He turned around and headed back home. So after this is done, now it has met the condition. So now Abner, he's not done yet because he has met the condition to where once he has things in place, he can now be in the presence of David. So Abner now has to work on communicating with all the tribes and getting them behind him so that he can bring the tribes then to David. Now that's one of the things that the fragileness of the relationships. Yeah, okay, they were the 10 northern tribes, but we have always seen that it's kind of like a dysfunctional family. These tribes were united as Hebrew. They had a shared genealogy, shared blessings, same law of Moses, but it's still, you needed to respect each individual tribe. And this is what Abner's going to do and does well when he does this. So let's look at 17 and 19. And Abner conferred with the elders of Israel. So Israel, those 11 tribes in the north. For some time past, you have been seeking David as king over you. Now then, bring it about. For the Lord has promised David, saying, by the hand of my servant David, I will save my people Israel from the hand of the Philistines and from the hand of all their enemies. Abner also spoke to Benjamin. This is something really cool. You have a message tailored to the 10 of the tribes. Then you have a message tailored to the Benjamites. Why? So he also expresses in this conversation with them, he says, you've been seeking David to be king over you. So what's been stopping him? Abner. And he says, and he knows they have this knowledge that the Lord has promised that David would deliver them. So there's a fine line that's kind of been holding them back. And I think a lot of it had to do with Abner, and I think a lot of what Saul did in the reputation. We talk about fake news. I think there was a lot of fake news going on around about David that kind of harmed possibly his reputation, and especially because where is Saul from? What tribe? The Benjamites. So they have a lot to lose. And so Abner, that's why I think that Abner had a specific conversation with the Benjamites. By the way, Abner as well is a Benjamite. So he's got everything in place. He finally has all the elders lined up. He's returned and met the conditions to meet. And so Abner now goes and he meets with David. So let's go ahead and read 19, the last part of 19, and then to 21. Then Abner went to tell David at Hebron all that Israel and the whole house of Benjamin thought good to do. You notice again, it kind of distinguishes even Benjamin. Then Abner came with 20 men to David at Hebron. David made a feast for Abner and the men who were with him. And Abner said to David, I will arise and go and gather all Israel to my lord the king, that they may make a covenant with you, and that you may reign over all that your heart desires. So David sent Abner away, and he went in peace. So he comes to Hebron with a message that all the elders are in alignment. And again, you notice that it's written that we see where even the house of Benjamin. David wants all of them united. He doesn't want just, he doesn't want one straggler. He wants them all. And so he didn't want to use brute force. He wanted them to come to this realization. And we know that they had this knowledge, that it was there. Abner brings that out. You guys have known this. So, this is not something new. You want it. So let's do it. Let's go ahead and let's line up. So when David greets him, you see that he doesn't treat him like secondhand citizen. He sets up a feast. He gives him a great deal of respect by having this feast with him, and then he sends him off. He says, okay, and sends him away. And you notice it says the very last words, and he went in peace. They had a good meeting. They had a great, coming together, striking up this covenant, making a plan to reunite everything. This is where the battle at the pool of Gibeon comes up again. Because there's that other guy, Joab. So Joab is not around when this goes down. Joab shows up after. So let's start in 23. When Joab and all the army that was with him came, it was told to Joab, Abner the son of Ner came to the king, and he has let him go, and he has gone in peace. Then Joab went to the king and said, what have you done? Behold, Abner came to you. Why is it that you sent him away, so that he is gone? You know that Abner, the son of Ner, came to deceive you and to know you're going out and you're coming in and to know all that you are doing. We are at war. That's Joab's mindset. We're at war. You notice we saw this when Abner was being pursued. Remember what Abner told his brother as he was pursuing, and he told him, look, don't do this. I don't want to have to kill you. Even in that, when his army, Abner's army had been routed, Abner is thinking much more global in a bigger strategy than Joab. Joab, he only stopped that pursuit because his men had heard what Abner said. Abner made sense. It cooled him down. And Joab said, if my men hadn't heard, we would have kept fighting. Joab pulls back. But he wants blood. You killed my brother. Joab, that's nothing new. I mean, when you look at a civil war, when you look at the loss of life that occurs, Joab, you're not new to this. Brothers, friends, they've watched a lot of people throughout the years with David that was killed. But this has turned Joab very hard and very vindictive in wanting this. And listen to the tone that he speaks to the king. What have you done? Now, notice somebody told him. So there's somebody else that also doesn't like this idea that Abner came along. Might have been a brother, we don't know. But we know somebody went and told Joab as soon as they got into town, bam, tells him. And immediately you could just almost see Joab storming right up to the king. What have you done? Well, who's king? See, this is who gets to talk to the king like that? What king puts up with this? It's kind of interesting that David, there's no real rebuttal. There's nothing. There's something under here going on. Now remember, Joab's his nephew, but he's still the commander of his army. And he's good. He really is a very good warrior. I think so much so that he was a fearful warrior, one that, probably had a little PTSD going on. And, when he had his mind on something, and that's where he is not looking at the total picture that David and Abner were looking at. Abner, it's still a little selfish motivation in what he's trying to accomplish. Why have you done that? He's gone. You know he's just coming to spy. See, that's a guy in combat mode. That's all he can see. Because he's coming here to see what we've got going on, and you just let him slip out. So he's not going to let this go. He's not going to let this go. So Joab ends up killing him, and the way he does it is very deceptive. In 26 and 27, when Joab came out from David's presence, he sent messengers after Abner. Right away. I mean, as soon as he walks away from the king. And they brought him back from the cistern of Sirah, but David did not know about it. And when Abner returned to Hebron, Joab took him aside into the midst of the gate to speak to him privately, and there he struck him in the stomach, so that he died for the blood of Ashel, his brother. So as soon as he walks out from talking to the king, and okay, we don't have the words of David, but what do you think? What do you think he told Joab? Do you think he just took it? David didn't say a word? No. I think David explained to him and told him, look, he's bringing all the leaders and the elders of the tribes. He is going to cause all of us to be able to come together, reconcile, and end the war. Stop this fighting. So, yes, I let Abner go because we're fixing to unify this entire family once more. He's not seeing it. Joab's not seeing it, the viciousness. So he sends messengers after Abner. Now, Abner, as far as he knows, Joab is on the same sheet of music as the king. So he's got nothing to fear. Last time, him and Joab, he was on the run, and he knew that hothead down at the bottom of the hill that was chasing him would not let up. So Abner knows Joab. Joab, he has a vicious side to him. So this is a setup and an ambush because Abner is not thinking defensively or trying to protect himself and believing that Joab somehow is going to kill him. They are, they're equals. They're generals. They're the generals of two nations. Joab of Judah, Abner of the northern tribes. So if Abner gets a message saying that Joab wants to meet with him, then he's going to give him that respect and come back and meet with him. And then Joab kind of slides him off to the side, trying to hold a conversation with him, and then murders him. Notice how he murdered him? Same way as brother. He struck him right through the stomach. And it says that it was revenge killing. So how does David respond? And this is something where we see that impact that's going to echo through for a while and really complicate things, is the way that David now responds is going to be so critical in the direction that this reconciliation is going to go. Remember, Abner was going back together and bring the message to the elders of the tribes. Now he's dead. What's next? What's going to happen? We were going to reconcile, and you killed the guy that was going to reconcile. Your general did this. So David has to do a lot of damage control. What's interesting is he's not setting it up like he's got a PR guy advising him, saying, okay, David, okay, this is a bad situation, but we can make this right. Let's go ahead and do this and this and this. I think what's amazing about this is that the way that David responds is truly a very sincere spiritual response. So let's read 28 and 30. When David heard of it, he said, I and my kingdom are forever guiltless before the Lord for the blood of Abner the son of Ner. May it fall upon the head of Joab and upon all his father's house. And may the house of Joab never be without one who has a discharge, or who is leprous, or who holds a spindle, or who falls by the sword, or who lacks bread. So Joab and Abishai, his brother, killed Abner because they had put their brother Ashel to death in the battle of Gibeon. So David puts a curse upon him. And we are going to see Joab much later, and his advice of Solomon when he tells his young son, you got to take the guy out. He tells him on his deathbed, don't let his gray hair go down. In other words, don't let him die of old age. David knows he's dangerous. Why he doesn't take him out, we don't have it really written, but he is family, and David has a loyalty as well. So he gives him a curse on the house. And this is where I think it's so important for us to think about, is the way that he responds in his grief and after he finds out. And this is where this complex side, where he can be this musician who can write poetry beautifully from the soul, and then turn around and be this incredible warrior type of man, can lead men into battle and fight and kill 100 Philistines, bring back their foreskins, and then turn around and we see, like when Saul, who had persecuted him so much that it hurt him emotionally, it really did. And then when we see Abner and his response, remember they had a relationship. The first time they met was on a battlefield at David and Goliath, when David fought Goliath and he walked in. So they've known each other for a long time. And so there's a respect here as well, a respect for the person and his position and his service to the king. So in this mourning, that David, and I'm going to read, I'm not going to bring it up, but in 31, then David said to Joab and to all the people who were with him, tear your clothes and put on sackcloth and mourn before Abner, before his body. They buried Abner at Hebron. And the king lifted up his voice and he wept at the grave of Abner. And all the people wept. And the king lamented for Abner, saying, should Abner die as a fool dies? Your hands were not bound, your feet were not fettered. As one falls before the wicked, you have fallen. Ouch, if you're Abner. And all the people wept again over him. Then all the people came to persuade David to eat bread while it was yet day. But David swore, saying, God, do so to me and more also, if I taste bread or anything else till the sun goes down. Remember Abner said that to Ishbosheth? Ishbosheth, when he said, let the Lord do this to me, when he said, if I don't turn the whole kingdom over. This is the same type of a phrase. It's like an oath that they're taking without invoking the Lord's name. And all the people took notice of it, and it pleased them, as everything the king did pleased all the people. So all the people and all Israel understood that day that it had not been the king's will to put to death Abner, the son of Ner. And the king said to his servants, do you not know that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel? And I was gentle today, though anointed king. These men, the sons of Zeruiah, are more severe than I. The Lord repay the evil according to his wickedness. So that's a pretty powerful expression of who he is, and showing again the greater spirituality that he has versus the people that he's having around him. And how that even these people that are very self-serving and evil, like the way that Joab and Joab's brother is, that David is still, because of his sincerity and his loyalty and his relationship with God, is able to continue to move forward and to fulfill. And it wasn't some show. Like I said, it wasn't a damage control where some PR guy said, okay, you really got to look sad and you got to tear your clothes and no, this is David. This is David. And that's what makes him such a beautiful character for us to be able to look at. The strength in one moment, the wisdom, the sincerity, and the spirituality all coming out in a man that we can now clearly start to see why God said, that's a man after my heart. So we got a little bit of time, and if you want, we're going to throw up some thoughts and a little bit tying into the review and see if you want to involve on the chat. I'm kind of watching, and Jack is helping me as well. So why didn't David just attack the tribes of Israel after defeating Abner up in the pool of Gibeon? Remember the body count. They lost 360. he lost 19 plus 1, 20. His men were fresh. He had no real losses at all. He had no losses at all when it came to the Battle of the Philistines and the Hebrew army. They're in a very weak point. So I'm just kind of wondering why didn't he just go ahead and take it over? I mean, it's his God-given right, as we'd say some ways, right? I mean, God said, you're going to rule all the tribes. I'm going to set you up. And he's sitting down there with just one tribe, his home tribe. Well, of course they're going to endorse him. And you see the chaos, and that chaos is creating more harm for the people. The Philistines are still, have free will all over the place, free passage. So why wouldn't he why let this just linger on? One of the reasons that I see in this, and there's not like a real right answer. It's just kind of a summation of what we've witnessed so far, is one, Israel is still his family. And he doesn't want to do more violence and inflict more harm upon them. And every person that he kills is a family member of somebody's family. And the impact is going to have a repercussion that's going to go a long way beyond, even if he was to have invaded and was successful to take over. He knows that spiritually they just wouldn't be right. They would still have that problem. So I think that's one of the main reasons that he delayed. So why was Abner angry with Ishbosheth? Well, Abner felt disrespected after all that he had struggled to accomplish in his mind, to be treated the way that Ishbosheth, the little puppet kid that he had put into power, and everything that he is because of Abner, and then to have him turn around and disrespect him with that statement, but not Abner as well. You know what I thought of is, in that statement, they didn't have this term back then, but in a way, I think Abner gaslighted him. Because if you think of that term, what happens when you get gaslighted is you get minimized to where what you're saying is and they turn it around on you. So this is one of the first ones I've seen in the Bible, because I just learned that term and kind of figured out what it means. But Abner gaslighted Ishbosheth, because he took what Ishbosheth said, which was right. What are you doing messing around with my father's concubines? Don't you know? Yes, you do know, Abner, that if by you doing that and the power position you're in, you can actually take away the kingdom from me. Why would I not be a little disturbed by it? So he gaslighted him by saying, you think I'm a head of the dog of Judah after all that I've done for you? And he turns it right around to make Ishbosheth. And you notice that after that, he goes, okay. And he can't really say anything after this. So, see, I'm not seeing any chat. Oh, okay, I'm not scrolled down enough. I'm sorry, guys. Because Ishbosheth accused him of wanting Saul's concubine. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Richard Klein. Wow. Now there's a name we haven't heard in a while. I've seen you guys still out in the Carolina area there? No, you're very welcome for the class. I'm glad you could join us. That's one of the beautiful things. We've had people that used to worship here years ago that have come back, and we've been able to kind of reconnect in a way on this. Yeah, so one of the things about Ishbosheth is, that he is the puppet, but he did have a legitimate concern. Well, he knew Abner was controlling him. Ah, yes, they are in the Carolinas. And so, yeah, it's something so let's look at what was his motive. When you think about what was motivating Abner, well, he served Saul. Saul's a Benjamite. Abner's a Benjamite. He also was extremely disrespected by David. Remember the second time that he had the opportunity to kill the king, and David sneaks into the camp, and he takes the spear from the king, and he takes his water jug, and he sneaks out in the dark, and he gets across, and he shouts out. And one of the things he does goes, "Abner, is that you? Hey, what are you doing? You're letting the king get killed? You should be punished. You should be executed for your failure to protect the king." So I'm sure that didn't help. And so I think he was trying to keep power for himself. And it just a lot of the ego going in there. But the problem I have is it has to be something very selfish, because he knows the prophecies have been said about David. He has watched him, go out and kill Goliath. He's watched him march out with the idea that the king thought that if he sent him out to kill enough Philistines, that eventually this little boy would get killed, come back victorious, constantly. Constantly. So it's Abner knows better. So it has to be something that's very selfish in his motivation. And I think it is something where he doesn't like David. So let's move on, because we're running out of time. So was David naive about Abner? Remember what Joab said? When I think about, Abner coming in and sends that message, and he just seems to go ahead and take it. Joab seems to have a different perspective, doesn't he, about Abner? No, he was not naive at all. David knew that he needed Abner to reunite these tribes together. So when we compare and contrast these two commanding generals of these militaries, it is quite a difference when we look at it. Abner was much more seasoned. He's probably older as well, because we know that when we look at the relationships, that Abner was an older man. He had seen a lot. He had been with the king. He knew what it was like to be in a ruling position of power. He had been in battles. So he could look further out strategically. He did share something in common, was it takes a certain personality to be a military leader at this level in order to command troops into battle and to be successful. They did share that part in their personalities. Joab was just spit and vinegar. You could just see that he was all about, accomplishing the mission and very good at it. But boy, come on, man. You never thought you were going to lose a brother in battle? And he just lost focus, didn't listen to the king wanting to occur, and that is to bring David into rule over all of them. So what about David's sorrow? Was it genuine about Abner? Absolutely. Yes. It was something very genuine as well. And so what was the result? So we have Joab just blew up the peace process, didn't he? And now, in all of this, because of his spirituality, David is reflecting on the loss of Abner and the tragedy that occurred, not talking about the future. He'll come back to that. You know, okay, now we got to really deal with the problem, but he's not. He's stopping. He's paying respect to Abner. And the result is, because of his spiritualness, people see this. And it wasn't because of his sweet talking. It wasn't because of him being able to show some evidence or something, but just watching who he is. The fruit of his spirit was exuding out in the death and respect that he was demonstrating to Abner. And all the people saw that. And that was what helped them. So it was effective. And so even though what Joab did, with God and with David, his spirituality was able to be successful. So that's all we have tonight. We're kind of a little bit over, but I hope that you enjoyed the class. If you have any comments, you can leave them behind. I do appreciate everybody taking the time to be with us tonight. If you're not able to, catch it on the videos where they're up there on the YouTube channel. Please subscribe, click subscribe and the notifications so that when we do some testing, but most of the times when we're coming live, we've got a Bible class, we've got worship. This Friday morning, we're continuing the class at 10 a.m. Search for the Church, studying and looking for it in the book of Acts. We had like 21 people viewing on Friday morning. So I guess people are enjoying it. So why don't you come check it out and join us? So, all right. Well, I'm going to wrap it up. We'll see you guys later.